Admiral Zeftai had seen many impossible things in his 4 centuries of military service. He had watched entire moons crack apart under the focused fire of dreadnought cannons. He had witnessed the birth of new stars from the bridge of his flagship. He had even survived the Great Plague that wiped out 60% of his homeworld's population. But nothing in his vast experience had prepared him for the sight currently filling his main viewscreen. The Devourers had arrived 3 days ago, emerging from the void between galaxies like some cosmic nightmare made flesh. Their ships looked more like living creatures than vessels, massive, writhing things covered in what appeared to be scales and sporting rows of teeth that could tear through battle cruiser hulls. Each one was the size of a small city, and the fleet stretched across space like a plague of metallic locusts. They had already consumed the outer rim territories. 17 star systems gone in 72 hours. Not destroyed, consumed. The Devourers didn't just kill their enemies, they absorbed everything. Ships, stations, planets, even the stars themselves were somehow drawn into those terrible maws and converted into more ships, more soldiers, more hunger. The Galactic Council's combined fleet represented the accumulated military might of 43 different species. 2 million vessels ranging from nimble fighters to massive capital ships. It was the largest armada ever assembled in known history. It wasn't going to be enough. Zeftai's tactical display painted a grim picture. The Devourers outnumbered them 3-1, and that number was growing every moment as they consumed disabled Council ships and converted them into reinforcements. Worse, their technology seemed to adapt in real time. Weapons that had been effective in the first hour of battle were now completely useless. "Sir," his communications officer called out, his voice barely steady. "We're receiving reports from the 4th Battle Group. Admiral Corex is requesting immediate assistance. They're down to 30% strength." Zeftai closed his eyes for a moment. Corex commanded some of the finest warriors in the galaxy, proud Theric fighters who had never known defeat. If they were falling back, the situation was even worse than the tactical displays indicated. "Tell Admiral Corex to fall back to defensive position 7, he ordered. "We'll cover their retreat with the 9th Squadron." The order tasted like ash in his mouth. In 300 years of military service, he had never ordered a retreat. But, then, again, he had never faced an enemy like this. "Sir," the tactical officer interrupted, his 6 eyes wide with something between confusion and terror. "I'm reading massive energy signatures approaching from the outer system. Multiple contacts, unknown configuration." Zeftai turned to study the new readings. The energy patterns were unlike anything in the Council database. More troubling, they seemed to be heading directly toward the battle zone at speeds that shouldn't have been possible without tearing the ships apart. "Put it on the main screen," he commanded. The view screen shifted to show the edge of the system. At first, there was nothing but stars and the faint glow of distant nebulae. Then, space began to ripple, like water disturbed by a stone. The ripples grew larger, more violent, until suddenly, ships began emerging from what appeared to be tears in reality itself. But these weren't like any ships Zeftai had ever seen. They were smaller than Council vessels, built along lines that suggested both elegance and ruthless efficiency. Their hulls gleamed with an odd silvery material that seemed to shift and flow like liquid metal. Most unsettling of all, they moved with a grace that reminded him uncomfortably of predators stalking prey. "How many?" he asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. "I'm counting, this can't be right." "Sir, I'm reading over 10,000 individual vessels. They're organized into battle groups, but the formations don't match anything in our tactical database. 10,000 ships appearing from nowhere, with technology that allowed them to punch holes in space itself." Under normal circumstances, Zeftai would have assumed they were reinforcements sent by some secret Council project. But these weren't normal circumstances, and something about those ships made the scales along his spine rise in an ancient defensive response. "Are they responding to our hails?" he asked. "No, sir. But they're broadcasting on all frequencies. It's strange. The message is in Old Galactic, but the language patterns are archaic. Almost like they learned it from historical texts rather than living speakers. Put it through." The voice that filled the bridge was distinctly alien, though in a way that was hard to define. The words were perfectly pronounced, but there was something underneath them, a rhythm, an accent that spoke of a completely different evolutionary path. "Council Fleet, this is Terra Expeditionary Force 7. We are responding to your distress beacon. Prepare to receive tactical coordination data. Be advised, we are initiating combat operations against hostile forces in 30 seconds. The bridge fell silent. Terra was a name from the old stories, the legends that every species told their children. The mythical home world of creatures so fierce that the galaxy's nightmares had nightmares about them. It was as real as dragons or magic or any of a dozen other fairy tales. "Sir," the communications officer whispered, "they're requesting permission to transmit battle plans directly to our tactical computers." Zeftai stared at the ships on his screen. They had arranged themselves into attack formations with a speed and precision that spoke of either advanced artificial intelligence or crews trained to a degree that bordered on the supernatural. More importantly, they were positioning themselves between the Council fleet and the Devourers. A species that didn't exist was asking permission to die for them. "Grant the request," he said finally. "And signal all ships to prepare for coordinated attack patterns." The data burst that hit his tactical computers was unlike anything in his experience. The battle plans were incredibly detailed, accounting for variables that his own strategists hadn't even considered. More impressive was the speed. The entire fleet coordination package had been transmitted, processed, and integrated in less than 10 seconds. But it was the final message that made his blood run cold. "Council fleet, be advised that enemy forces show characteristics consistent with Type 7 extinction events. Terra Command has authorized full weapons release. We recommend that Council vessels maintain minimum safe distance of 50,000 kilometers from Terra formations during combat operations." Good hunting. Type 7 extinction events. He had never heard the classification before, but something about it suggested these strangers had encountered threats like the Devourers before. The request to maintain distance was equally ominous. What kind of weapons required 50,000 kilometers of separation? On the main screen, the Terra ships began to move. They didn't accelerate gradually like normal vessels. They simply went from stationary to combat speed in an instant, as if space itself was bending around them. The formations flowed like schools of fish, each ship maintaining perfect position relative to its neighbors while the entire group moved with predatory grace. The Devourers seemed to sense the new threat. Their own formations began to shift, turning their attention from the battered Council fleet to these new arrivals. The massive bioships oriented themselves like sharks scenting blood, their weapon ports beginning to glow with malevolent energy. "Sir," the sensor officer called out, his voice tight with excitement and fear, "the Terra ships are charging weapons. Energy readings are, this can't be correct." "Sir, individual vessels are showing power outputs equal to our entire battle group." Zeftai didn't reply. He was too busy watching the impossible dance playing out on his screen. The Terra ships had spread into a formation that looked almost organic, like the petals of some vast flower opening toward the enemy. At the center of each formation, larger vessels hung motionless while the smaller ships wove complex patterns around them. The Devourers struck first, launching waves of plasma that turned space itself into a sea of fire. Any normal fleet would have been vaporized instantly. The Terra ships simply weren't there when the weapons arrived, having somehow shifted position without any visible means of propulsion. Then, they fired back. The weapons that lanced out from the Terra fleet defied every rule of physics Zeftai thought he understood. Instead of the bright beams or explosive projectiles he was used to, these were tears in space itself, long, thin wounds in reality that simply deleted everything they touched. Devourer ships didn't explode or break apart. They simply ceased to exist along perfect lines that cut through armor, superstructure, and whatever passed for crew as if they were made of paper. But the most terrifying part wasn't the weapons themselves. It was how precisely they were used. The Terra ships weren't just firing randomly, they were performing surgery on the enemy fleet. Weapons systems vanished. Engine pods disappeared. Command centers simply stopped existing. Within minutes, dozens of the massive bioships had been reduced to helpless hulks drifting in space. "My gods," someone whispered on the bridge. "They're not trying to destroy them. They're trying to capture them." The realization hit Zeftai like a physical blow. The Terra ships were systematically disabling the most dangerous military force the galaxy had ever seen with the casual efficiency of a farmer harvesting crops. More than that, they were doing it with surgical precision that suggested they had studied Devourer technology in detail. Which should have been impossible, since no one had ever survived an encounter with the Devourers long enough to study them. "Council fleet," the Terra voice came through the communicators again, still perfectly calm despite the cosmic carnage unfolding around them. We are transmitting priority intelligence data regarding hostile technology. Be advised that enemy vessels utilize quantum conversion systems and will attempt to adapt to standard energy weapons within 12 minutes of first contact. Recommend switching to kinetic bombardment systems immediately. The information packet that accompanied the message contained technical specifications that made Zephty's head spin. Detailed analysis of Devourer ship construction, weakness points in their defensive systems, and, most importantly, the revelation that they had been fighting the wrong kind of war from the beginning. How do they know all this? His science officer asked, scanning through the data with increasing amazement. Sir, this intelligence is more detailed than what we've gathered in 3 days of direct combat. It's like they've been studying these creatures for years. That's when the truly terrifying possibility occurred to Zephty. What if they had been studying the Devourers for years? What if these Terra ships hadn't just happened to arrive in time to help? What if they had been hunting the Devourers across the galaxy, following them like some cosmic pest control service? The battle continued for another 6 hours, but the outcome was never in doubt after those first few minutes. The Terra ships moved through the Devourer fleet like antibodies attacking an infection, systematically dismantling threats with an efficiency that spoke of long practice. When Devourer reinforcements arrived through their own dimensional portals, Terra vessels were already in position to intercept them. By the end, nearly 1,000 Devourer ships had been destroyed or disabled. The remainder had retreated through dimensional rifts, apparently deciding that whatever they hoped to consume here wasn't worth the cost. The Council had lost fewer than 50 ships. When the immediate threat was over, Zephty found himself staring at his tactical display in stunned silence. The Terra fleet had reformed into their original formations, hanging motionless in space like they were waiting for something. Several of the disabled Devourer ships were being approached by smaller Terra vessels, boarding craft, apparently. Sir, his communications officer said quietly, we're receiving a transmission from the Terra flagship. Put it through. This time the voice was different, older, carrying an authority that made Zephty straighten unconsciously in his chair. Admiral Zephty of the Council First Fleet. This is Fleet Admiral Sarah Chen of the Terra Expeditionary Force. Request permission to come aboard your vessel for tactical debriefing. The request should have been routine. Fleet commanders often met after major engagements to coordinate cleanup operations and share intelligence. But something about the way she phrased it suggested this was anything but routine. Permission granted, Admiral Chen. My shuttle bay is prepared to receive you. Thank you. Be advised that I will be accompanied by a small security detail. Our ships will maintain current positions pending the outcome of our discussion. The channel closed, leaving Zephty staring at the screen. A small security detail from a species that didn't exist, arriving to discuss something important enough to keep 10,000 warships hanging in space. He had a feeling that this conversation was going to change everything he thought he knew about the galaxy. 20 minutes later, he stood in his main shuttle bay watching a craft unlike anything in Council design databases glide through the atmospheric barrier. The ship was small but elegant, its hull flowing in curves that suggested it had been grown rather than built. When it touched down, there was no sound, not even the whisper of landing thrusters. A ramp extended from the craft's side, and Admiral Sarachin stepped into his ship. She was definitely humanoid, but different enough to make it clear she wasn't from any known species. Slightly shorter than average, with pale skin and dark hair pulled back in a severe style that emphasized sharp, intelligent eyes. She wore a uniform that looked both practical and elegant, dark blue with silver accents that caught the light strangely. But it was her companions that made Zephty's security staff take an involuntary step backward. The 4 beings that flanked her were clearly the same species, but built along different lines entirely. Taller, broader, moving with a fluid grace that suggested they could go from stillness to lethal action in a heartbeat. Their uniforms were darker, almost black, with equipment that hummed with barely contained energy. Admiral Zephty, Chen said, extending her hand in what was apparently a human greeting gesture. Thank you for allowing us aboard. I apologize for the dramatic entrance, but we found that proper introductions work better in person. Zephty accepted the gesture cautiously. Her hand was warm, with a grip that spoke of controlled strength. Admiral Chen, he replied, I believe we owe you our lives. The entire galaxy owes you our lives. Her expression didn't change, but something flickered in those sharp eyes. Actually, Admiral, that's what we need to discuss. The galaxy doesn't owe us anything. But it's time for some long overdue introductions. She gestured toward a nearby conference room. Shall we? I think you're going to want to be sitting down for what I have to tell you about exactly where humans have been for the last 300 years, and why we just happened to arrive in time to keep the Devourers from turning your fleet into lunch." As they walked toward the conference room, Seftai couldn't shake the feeling that whatever she was about to tell him was going to turn his understanding of the galaxy upside down. The creatures that weren't supposed to exist had just saved them all from an enemy that shouldn't have been possible to defeat. He was beginning to suspect that both impossibilities were connected in ways that were going to give him nightmares for years to come. The conference room felt too small with Admiral Chen and her security detail inside it. Not because of their physical size, though the guards were certainly imposing, but because of something else, an intensity that made the air itself seem charged with potential energy. Seftai had commanded fleets and negotiated with the most powerful beings in the galaxy, but he had never felt quite this aware of being in the presence of apex predators. Chen settled into her chair with the easy grace of someone completely comfortable with command. Her guards positioned themselves at the exits, not obviously threatening, but definitely present. When she spoke, her voice carried the kind of quiet authority that came from being obeyed without question for a very long time. "Admiral, before we begin, I need to ask you a question. In all your historical databases, in all the stories told by every species in the Council, what do you know about the Great Silence?" Seftai felt his secondary heart skip. The Great Silence was one of the galaxy's oldest mysteries, a period roughly 3,000 years ago when all long-range communications had simply stopped working for nearly a century. When contact was finally re-established between star systems, everyone claimed they had never lost communication at all. It was as if the entire galaxy had collectively agreed to forget that anything had happened. "The historical record is incomplete," he said carefully. "Most scholars believe it was caused by some kind of natural phenomenon. Solar flares, perhaps, or gravitational anomalies from a passing dark matter cloud." Chen's smile was sharp enough to cut. "That's the story everyone tells themselves. The truth is considerably more disturbing." She gestured, and one of her guards stepped forward with a device that looked like a cross between a computer terminal and a piece of abstract art. When activated, it projected a holographic star map that showed the galaxy as it had existed 3,000 years ago. 3 millennia ago, Chen continued, this galaxy was home to approximately 2 million intelligent species. Trade flowed freely between systems. The first Galactic Council was actually functional rather than the bureaucratic nightmare it became later. And then, in the space of 6 months, 97% of all intelligent life simply vanished. The hologram zoomed in on specific star systems, showing thriving worlds that suddenly went dark one after another. The pattern was clearly visible, something had moved through the galaxy like a cosmic plague, leaving empty systems in its wake. "The Devourers," Seftai whispered. "The Devourers," Chen confirmed. "But not the relatively small force you encountered today. This was their full invasion fleet, millions of ships, billions of soldier drones, all backed by technology that made them effectively unstoppable. They consumed everything in their path, converting organic matter and technology into more Devourers." Seftai stared at the hologram in horror. "But how did any civilization survive? How did the galaxy recover?" "Most didn't survive," Chen said quietly. "The species you know today, the ones that make up the modern council, they're mostly descendants of scattered survivor colonies that managed to hide until the danger passed. The great civilizations, the ones with millions of worlds and technologies that bordered on magic, they're all gone." She paused, letting the implications sink in. "All except one." The hologram shifted, zooming in on a small, unremarkable star system on the galaxy's outer rim. "Sol system," Chen said. "Home to a young species that had barely developed faster than light travel. When the Devourers arrived, humanity had exactly 17 colonies and a total population of about 12 billion. "You fought them," Seftai said. "It wasn't a question." "We fought them," Chen agreed. "And we lost. Badly. The Devourers tore through our defenses like they weren't there. Earth fell in 6 hours. Every colony was consumed within days. By any reasonable measure, humanity should have been completely extinct within a week." Seftai studied her face, looking for some clue about where this story was heading. "But you're here. We're here because humans have one characteristic that the Devourers hadn't encountered before in any other species. We're really, really bad at staying dead." The hologram changed again, showing what appeared to be battle damage on a massive scale. Destroyed fleets, burning worlds, space itself scarred by weapons fire. But, gradually, the picture began to change. Small human forces appeared, striking at Devourer supply lines and disappearing again. Hit and run attacks that barely registered against the main invasion force but never stopped coming. The Devourers expected us to be extinct, Chen explained. Instead, we became ghosts. Survivor fleets hiding in asteroid belts and nebulae, striking without warning and vanishing before they could respond. Refugee colonies that refused to give up, even when they were down to their last ship and their last hope. The tactical display showed the progression of the war in fast forward. What had started as a rot gradually became something else, a grinding conflict where the Devourers found themselves fighting an enemy that refused to follow the rules of civilized warfare. We learned from every encounter, Chen continued. Captured their technology, reverse-engineered their weapons, studied their biology. Most importantly, we learned that for all their advantages, the Devourers had one critical weakness. Which was? They had never fought anyone crazy enough to actually win. The hologram showed the turning point, massive human fleets emerging from hiding to engage Devourer forces in open combat. But, these weren't the desperate survivors that had fled the initial invasion. These ships were built using hybrid technology, part human engineering and part captured Devourer systems, optimized for the specific purpose of hunting their creators. It took us 80 years to build the forces necessary to go on the offensive, Chen said. 80 years of hiding in the dark between stars, building ships and training soldiers while the Devourers consumed the rest of the galaxy. When we finally attacked, they never saw us coming. The battle scenes that followed were unlike anything Zeftai had ever witnessed. Human ships moved with the same impossible grace he had observed during the recent battle, but these were fighting an enemy at the height of their power. The combat was brutal, desperate, and absolutely relentless. We drove them back, Chen said simply. System by system, world by world, we hunted down every last Devourer in this galaxy and destroyed them. It took another 150 years, but when we were finished, there wasn't a single one left. But that's impossible, Zeftai protested. The Devourers we just fought, they came from outside the galaxy. Exactly. Chen's expression grew grim. The force we just defeated was a scouting expedition. The Devourers we destroyed 3,000 years ago were refugees from somewhere else, survivors of a war they had lost in their home galaxy. What you encountered today was the advance guard of whatever drove them here in the first place, coming to check on their wayward children. The full implications hit Zeftai like a physical blow. You mean there are more of them? Millions more. Possibly billions. And now they know where this galaxy is located. Chen stood, beginning to pace the small confines of the conference room. After we finished with the original invasion, humanity faced a choice. We could rebuild our civilization, repopulate our worlds, and hope that whatever had driven the Devourers here in the first place would never follow them. Or we could prepare for the real war. You chose to prepare. We chose to prepare. For 300 years, human civilization has existed for exactly one purpose: to be ready when the true Devourer fleet arrived. Every ship, every weapon, every strategic decision has been focused on that goal. The hologram shifted to show the current state of human space. What Zeftai saw made his mind reel. Thousands of star systems, each one fortified beyond anything he could have imagined. Shipyards that stretched across entire asteroid belts. Training facilities built inside hollow moons. And, everywhere, the sleek, deadly ships he had seen in action today. You've been preparing for a war against an enemy that might never come, he said slowly. An enemy that just announced its arrival by sending scouts, Chen corrected. The force you helped us defeat today was looking for something specific. They were scanning for the quantum signatures we used during our campaigns against their advance forces 3 millennia ago. Now they know we're here, and they know we're the ones responsible for destroying their expedition. She turned to face him directly, and Zeftai saw something in her eyes that made his blood run cold. Admiral, the real war is about to begin. The scouts you saw today? They were a tiny fraction of what's coming. Within 6 months, this galaxy is going to be invaded by a force that makes today's battle look like a training exercise. What do you need from the Council? He asked, though he was beginning to suspect he already knew the answer. Nothing, Chen said, and her bluntness was somehow more terrifying than any demand could have been. The Council military is brave and well-trained, but you're not equipped for this kind of warfare. Your technology is designed for conflicts between civilized species who follow rules of engagement and respect basic concepts like surrender and prisoner exchange. The enemy we're facing doesn't understand any of those concepts. Then, why are you telling us this? Chen's expression softened slightly. Because in 6 months, when the real invasion begins, human forces are going to do things that will seem monstrous to civilized observers. We're going to use weapons that violate every treaty the Council has ever signed. We're going to fight in ways that will make your military philosophers weep. And we're going to win, regardless of the cost. She paused, choosing her words carefully. I'm telling you this so that when the shooting starts, the Council will understand that we're not the villains in this story. We're just the only species in this galaxy that spent 300 years learning how to be monsters so that everyone else could afford to remain civilized. Zeftai sat in silence, trying to process everything he had heard. The species that wasn't supposed to exist had just revealed that they had been preparing for a war beyond imagination for 3 centuries. More than that, they had just casually mentioned that they were planning to commit acts that would horrify every civilized being in the galaxy. What happens now? He asked finally. Now you go back to the Council and tell them exactly what I've told you, Chen said. Some of them will believe you. Someone then will dismiss this entire conversation as the ravings of a traumatized officer. Most will probably assume that humans are just another threat to be managed or negotiated with. And, if they try to interfere with your preparations? The smile that crossed Chen's face was absolutely predatory. Admiral, you've seen what 10,000 human ships can do against a Devourer scouting force. Our actual military consists of approximately 40 million vessels and 3 billion soldiers who have spent their entire lives training for exactly this conflict. She gestured toward the viewport, where the human fleet still hung in perfect formation. The Council is welcome to try to interfere. But, I should mention that we've spent 3 centuries preparing for that possibility as well. The threat was delivered so casually that it took a moment for Zeftai to realize what she had just said. Humanity hadn't just been preparing to fight the Devourers. They had been preparing to fight anyone who might try to stop them from fighting the Devourers. We're not your enemies, Chen continued, her tone becoming more conciliatory. We have no interest in conquest or domination. When this war is over, assuming anyone survives to see that day, humanity will be happy to return to the shadows and let the galaxy continue as it has been. But, until then, we're going to do whatever is necessary to ensure that there is still a galaxy to return to. She stood to leave, her security details smoothly repositioning themselves around her. Admiral, I've transmitted a complete intelligence package to your computers. Technical specifications for Devourer technology, tactical assessments of their capabilities, and our best estimates for when and where the main invasion will begin. Share it with the Council or don't, that's your decision. Why give us this information if you don't need our help? Chen paused at the door. Because in 6 months, when the real fighting starts, you're going to see things that will challenge every assumption you have about warfare, morality, and what it means to be civilized. I want the Council to understand that everything we do, every choice we make, will be driven by one simple goal. Which is making sure that when this war is over, there are still children playing in council parks and artists creating beauty and philosophers debating ethics. The Devourers don't want your resources or your territory. They want to consume everything you are and everything you could ever become. We're going to stop them. She stepped toward the exit, then turned back one final time. And, Admiral? When you make your report to the Council, make sure you emphasize one crucial point. This isn't humanity asking for permission to save the galaxy. This is humanity informing you that we're going to save it whether you like it or not. The door closed behind her, leaving Zeftai alone in the conference room with the weight of knowledge that was going to transform his understanding of the universe. Outside the viewport, he watched the human shuttle return to its mothership. Within minutes, the entire fleet began to move, disappearing back into the dimensional rifts they had emerged from. For the first time in centuries, the galaxy was about to discover what happened when legends decided to stop hiding in the shadows. And Zeftai had the unshakable feeling that by the time this war was over, the nightmares that had terrified children for 3,000 years were going to seem like pleasant dreams compared to the reality of what humanity was prepared to do to protect the innocent. The council chamber had never been more silent. Representatives from 43 species sat in their designated sections, staring at the holographic display that showed Admiral Zeftai's combat recordings. The images were impossible to deny: sleek human ships moving like living things, weapons that deleted matter from existence, and an enemy fleet that had been systematically dismantled by creatures that weren't supposed to exist. Counselor Vexthera of the Theric hegemony was the first to break the stunned silence. Her forearms gestured in the complex patterns that indicated extreme agitation among her people. This is clearly some form of elaborate deception. These humans are likely a previously unknown species attempting to manipulate council policy through fabricated historical claims. Murmurs of agreement rippled through sections of the chamber. It was easier to believe in conspiracy than to accept that everything they thought they knew about galactic history was wrong. Admiral Zeftai remained standing at the center of the chamber, his formal uniform bearing the scorch marks and stress indicators of recent combat. He had been answering questions and defending his report for 6 hours, but his patience was beginning to fray. "Counselor Vexthera," he said with forced calm, "I have submitted complete sensor logs, tactical analysis, and weapon signature data for independent verification. The humans saved my fleet and provided intelligence that explains 3,000 years of galactic mysteries. I hardly see how acknowledging their existence benefits anyone's political agenda." High Counselor Drexvar, the ancient Corvani who had led the council for over 2 centuries, raised one massive hand for silence. His species was known for careful deliberation and respect for evidence, which had made him an effective mediator between more impulsive races. "Admiral," his voice rumbled through the chamber's acoustics, "assuming for a moment that your report is accurate, what specific actions are you recommending the council take?" Zeftai activated his personal display, showing the intelligence package Admiral Chen had provided. "The humans have given us detailed information about an imminent invasion by forces that make today's encounter look insignificant. They estimate we have 6 months to prepare for the arrival of what they call the True Devourer fleet. And they have offered to coordinate our defense," asked Counselor Merida of the Peaceful Zenari Union. "No, Counselor. They have informed us that they will handle the defense themselves, regardless of council involvement. They wanted us to understand what was coming so that we could prepare ourselves for what they consider necessary measures." The distinction was subtle but crucial. Several counselors exchanged concerned glances. A military force announcing that they would take unilateral action to defend the galaxy wasn't asking for cooperation, they were delivering an ultimatum disguised as a courtesy. "What specific preparations are they suggesting?" High Counselor Drexvar asked. Zeftai hesitated. This was the part of Chen's message that had kept him awake for the 3 days since their meeting. They recommend that civilian populations in border systems be evacuated to core worlds. They also suggest that council military forces withdraw to defensive positions around major population centers rather than attempting to engage the enemy directly. The chamber erupted in angry voices. The implication was clear: humanity expected the council's military to essentially hide while they fought a war for the entire galaxy. Counselor Vexthera's voice cut through the chaos. "So these mysterious humans appear from nowhere, claim to be our saviors, and immediately demand that our fleet surrender control of the outer territories to them? This is obviously a conquest scenario disguised as a rescue operation." "With respect, Counselor," Zeftai replied, "the humans could have conquered the galaxy 300 years ago if that was their intention. Admiral Chen made it clear that they have 40 million warships and 3 billion soldiers. If they wanted our territory, they wouldn't need to invent elaborate stories about external threats." The number hung in the air like a physical presence. 40 million ships represented a military force larger than the combined historical production of every species in the galaxy. Even if it was an exaggeration, the implications were staggering. "Admiral," High Counselor Drexvar's tone was carefully neutral, "did Admiral Chen provide any evidence to support these claims about their military capacity?" Zeftai activated another display, showing long-range sensor readings his ships had taken during the human fleet's departure. "Our passive scans detected gravitational anomalies consistent with approximately 12,000 vessels in dimensional fold space. The ships we observed represented less than 1% of the human forces present in the system." The chamber fell silent again as representatives struggled to process the implications. If the humans had kept 99% of their forces hidden during a battle that had seemed like overkill, what did that say about their true capabilities? Counselor Jathak of the militant Razorclaws species stood slowly. His people were among the most aggressive in the council, with a culture built around concepts of honor and direct confrontation. "High Counselor, I believe we are focusing on the wrong question. Instead of debating whether these humans exist or what their intentions might be, we should be asking whether we can afford to ignore their warning. He gestured toward the tactical displays still showing the disabled Devourer ships. Regardless of who destroyed these vessels, the fact remains that an unknown enemy successfully invaded Council space and nearly overwhelmed our combined military forces. If there are more of them coming, we need to prepare for that possibility. Murmurs of agreement came from several sections. The pragmatists were beginning to outweigh the skeptics. High Counselor Drexvar nodded thoughtfully. A reasonable point, Counselor Jathak. Admiral Zeftai, what specific defensive measures are the humans recommending for Council forces? Zeftai consulted his notes, though he had memorized every word of Chen's briefing days ago. They suggest establishing hardened defensive positions around core worlds using the technical specifications they provided. The intelligence package includes details about Devourer weapons and tactics that could help us develop more effective countermeasures. And if we choose to engage the enemy directly alongside human forces? The Admiral's expression grew grim. Admiral Chen was explicit about the inadvisability of that option. She indicated that human combat doctrine for this conflict involves tactics and weapons that would be considered war crimes under Council law. Meaning what, exactly? Zeftai had hoped to avoid this part of the conversation, but the High Counselor's tone made it clear that evasion wasn't an option. Biological weapons designed to target specific genetic markers. Quantum viruses that infect enemy technology and cause it to turn on itself. Weaponized artificial intelligence that can take control of hostile vessels. Stellar engineering that uses stars themselves as weapons. The list continued, each item more horrifying than the last. When he finished, the chamber sat in stunned silence. They have the ability to weaponize stars? Counselor Merida whispered. According to their technical documentation, yes. They refer to it as stellar cascade induction. The process involves introducing quantum instabilities into a star's core that cause it to undergo controlled collapse, releasing the energy equivalent of a supernova in a directed beam. Several counselors began speaking at once, but High Counselor Drexvar's raised hand cut through the chaos. Admiral, in your professional opinion, are the humans presenting these capabilities as threats against the Council or as examples of what they consider necessary against the Devourers? The question went to the heart of everything that had been troubling Zeftai since his meeting with Admiral Chen. High Counselor, I believe they see no distinction between those two scenarios. If the Council attempts to interfere with their war effort, they will treat us as another obstacle to be removed. But, if we stay out of their way, they will limit their focus to the actual enemy. And, you believe their assessment of the threat is accurate? Zeftai thought about the creatures he had seen in the disabled Devourer ships, things that looked like they had been grown rather than built, with technology that seemed to blur the line between biology and engineering. Sir, I've never seen anything that frightened me as much as those Devourer vessels. But, I've also never seen anything as ruthlessly efficient as the human response to them. High Counselor, Counselor Vexthera interjected, surely we cannot simply accept that an unknown military force will conduct operations throughout Council space without any oversight or coordination. The precedent alone would be catastrophic for galactic stability. The precedent for galactic stability, Admiral Zeftai said quietly, is that civilizations exist. If Admiral Chen's assessment is correct, we're facing an enemy that wants to end that precedent permanently. At that point, questions of sovereignty and oversight become somewhat academic. High Counselor Drexvar stood slowly, his massive frame dominating the center of the chamber. The Council will debate these revelations and determine our official response. However, I believe we should also consider the practical implications of our situation. He gestured toward the tactical displays that still showed the aftermath of the battle. Whether or not we approve of their methods, the humans have demonstrated the ability to defeat an enemy that nearly destroyed our combined fleet. Whether or not we trust their motives, they have provided intelligence that could save countless lives. And, whether or not we like their ultimatum, they have the military capacity to enforce their will regardless of our decision. The brutal assessment left no room for comfortable illusions. The Council could debate and protest and pass resolutions, but, at the end of the day, they were dealing with a force that could ignore them completely. What are you suggesting, High Counselor? Asked Counselor Jathak. I'm suggesting that we focus on what we can control rather than what we cannot. We can evacuate civilian populations from vulnerable systems. We can fortify our core worlds using the defensive technologies the humans provided. We can prepare our medical facilities for massive casualty numbers. And we can hope that when this war is over, there will still be a civilization left to rebuild. And if the humans lose? High Counselor Drexvar's expression grew somber. Then, none of our other concerns will matter, because there won't be anyone left to have concerns. The debate continued for hours, but the essential points had been established. The Council was facing a situation completely outside their experience, a war between forces so far beyond their capabilities that their main contribution would be staying out of the way. As the session finally wound down, Admiral Zeftai found himself thinking about Admiral Chen's final warning. Humanity was about to do things that would horrify civilized observers, but they were doing it to preserve civilization itself. The question that kept nagging at him was whether there would be enough civilization left after the war to appreciate the sacrifice. Outside the Council chamber's massive windows, normal galactic life continued. Ships moved between star systems carrying trade goods and passengers. Scientists conducted research into the fundamental nature of the universe. Artists created works of beauty that would outlive their creators. Children played games that taught them about cooperation and fairness. In 6 months, if Admiral Chen was right, all of that would be under threat from an enemy that saw it as nothing more than raw material to be consumed. And the only thing standing between civilization and extinction would be a species that had spent 300 years learning how to be monsters. Zeftai just hoped that when the war was over, the monsters would remember how to be human again. The dimensional rifts opened like wounds in space, bleeding impossible geometry into the ordered universe. Where the human scouts had emerged as elegant tears that healed cleanly behind them, these portals vomited forth nightmares that made reality itself recoil in horror. Commander Elena Vasquez stood on the bridge of the Terra battleship Relentless Dawn, watching the enemy emerge on her tactical displays. After 6 months of preparation, the main Devourer invasion had finally begun exactly when and where Admiral Chen's intelligence had predicted it would. It was worse than anyone had imagined. Status report, she ordered, though her eyes never left the screens showing the emerging enemy fleet. Portal activity detected in 17 systems simultaneously, her tactical officer reported, his voice tight with controlled fear. Initial count shows approximately 50,000 hostile vessels in the first wave, with more emerging every minute. 50,000 ships in the opening minutes of an assault that was expected to last for years. Elena forced herself to remain calm as she watched the numbers climb higher. The Devourers weren't just invading, they were flooding the galaxy with more firepower than had ever existed in one place at one time. Fleet composition? Unknown vessel types, Commander. They match some profiles from the historical database, but most are completely new designs. Size estimates range from cruiser class to. The officer paused, double-checking his readings, to structures the size of small moons. Elena nodded grimly. The Devourers had spent 3,000 years evolving their technology, learning from their defeat at human hands and preparing for this moment. They weren't making the same mistakes twice. Communications, patch me through to Fleet Admiral Chen. The response was immediate. Commander Vasquez, this is Admiral Chen. Report. Ma'am, we have confirmation of invasion commencement across 17 systems. Enemy numbers exceed initial projections by approximately 300%. Recommend immediate implementation of Protocol 7. There was a brief pause before Chen's voice returned, carrying the weight of a decision 3 centuries in the making. Protocol 7 is authorized. All units are weapons-free for unrestricted engagement. Commander, show them what 300 years of preparation looks like. Elena turned to face her crew. These men and women had been born into a military culture that existed for one purpose, this moment. Every simulation, every training exercise, every strategic doctrine had been designed to prepare for the day when humanity would face the enemy that had nearly exterminated them millennia ago. All hands, this is the commander. We are now at full combat status. Protocol 7 is in effect. Today, we finish what our ancestors started 3,000 years ago. She activated the ship-wide communication system. To all vessels of the human defense fleet, this is your reminder of why we are here. Behind us lie 43 species who still believe in art and music and the possibility of a better tomorrow. Behind us are children who have never known fear of extinction, scientists who pursue knowledge for its own sake, and philosophers who debate the nature of morality. Elena's voice grew harder. Ahead of us is an enemy that sees all of that as nothing more than matter to be consumed. They do not negotiate. They do not surrender. They do not show mercy to the weak or respect for the innocent. They are extinction made manifest, and they have come to unmake everything we have sworn to protect. She paused, letting the weight of the moment settle on her crew. Today, we remind the universe why some species refuse to go quietly into the dark. Today, we show the galaxy what happens when someone threatens our children. The bridge fell silent except for the hum of charging weapons systems. Elena turned back to her tactical displays, watching as human fleets across 17 systems began moving into position. 40 million ships, 3 billion soldiers, and 300 years of accumulated rage and determination were about to be unleashed on an enemy that thought they had already won. Tactical, Target Priority Assessment. Ma'am, recommend we begin with the command vessels. Intelligence suggests they coordinate the smaller units through quantum entanglement networks. Disrupting those connections should cause temporary confusion in their formations. Elena studied the enemy formations. The Devourers had learned from their previous encounter with human forces. Instead of the chaotic swarms they had used 3 millennia ago, these fleets moved with disciplined precision that spoke of improved coordination and tactical awareness. Negative. Target the largest vessels first. I want them to know we're here. The tactical officer looked uncertain. Ma'am, engaging their dreadnoughts will expose us to maximum firepower from their escort formations. Elena's smile was sharp enough to cut diamond. Lieutenant, those aren't dreadnoughts. According to our intelligence, those are their mobile planetary processors, factory ships designed to consume entire worlds and convert them into more devourers. They represent the core of their expansion strategy. She gestured toward the massive structures on the display. And they're also proof that the Devourers still don't understand how humans think. They brought their most valuable assets to the front lines because they're used to fighting enemies who retreat when faced with superior firepower. The realization dawned on her officer's face. They don't know we don't retreat. They're about to learn. Elena activated the fleet communication network. All vessels, this is Commander Vasquez. Target designation Alpha Prime, the large factory ships. We're going to teach them that bringing your infrastructure to a gunfight is a tactical error. The response was immediate. Across the system, human ships began aligning themselves for attack runs on the largest enemy vessels. The Devourers, sensing the threat to their valuable factory ships, began reshuffling their formations to provide additional protection. Commander, her sensor officer called out, enemy vessels are charging weapons. Mass readings suggest they're preparing to engage. Let them, Elena said calmly. Weapons, prepare stellar lance batteries for concentrated fire. Target the lead factory ship. The stellar lances were humanity's answer to the Devourers' thick armor and adaptive defenses. Instead of conventional energy weapons that could be analyzed and countered, they used controlled tears in spacetime to deliver the core matter of stars directly to target locations. There was no defense against having a piece of a star's heart materialized inside your ship. Stellar lances charged and ready, Commander. Fire. Space lit up with impossible light as several human vessels opened fire simultaneously. The stellar lances appeared as brilliant lines of contained plasma stretching across millions of kilometers in an instant. When they struck the factory ship, the massive structure simply began to come apart from the inside as stellar matter burned through its internal structure. But, instead of the expected explosion, something else happened. The dying factory ship began to glow with an eerie light, and Elena realized with growing horror what they were witnessing. All ships, emergency evasive maneuvers. The factory ship is initiating quantum cascade. The warning came too late. The destroyed factory ship collapsed into a point of impossible density, then exploded outward in a wave of quantum energy that turned everything it touched into more devourers. Human ships caught in the blast radius found their hulls beginning to transform, their crews experiencing modifications that changed them into something else entirely. Ma'am, her tactical officer reported, his voice shaking, we've lost 17 vessels to the cascade effect. The factory ship was designed to weaponize its own destruction. Elena stared at the displays in shock. The Devourers had turned their most valuable assets into massive booby traps, counting on human aggression to trigger weapons of mass conversion. It was a level of strategic thinking they had never demonstrated before. Communications, get me Admiral Chen immediately. Commander, this is Chen. I saw the cascade event. Report your status. Ma'am, the factory ships are weaponized. They're designed to convert attacking forces when destroyed. We've lost 17 ships to transformation, and the enemy has gained approximately 40 new vessels from the converted mass. There was a long pause before Chen responded. When she did, her voice carried a cold fury that made Elena glad they were on the same side. Commander, the Devourers have just made a critical error in judgment. They've demonstrated that they learned our tactics but not our psychology. They think we'll be discouraged by losing ships to conversion effects. Ma'am? They obviously don't understand that humans consider you can't kill that without it killing you back to be a challenge rather than a deterrent. Implement Protocol 9 immediately. Protocol 9. Elena felt a chill run down her spine. Protocol 9 was the authorization for weapons so terrible that they had never been tested except in computer simulations. They were weapons designed for enemies who had proven they couldn't be defeated through conventional means. Ma'am, are you certain? Protocol 9 weapons have theoretical side effects that could. Commander, Chen's voice cut through her objections. The Devourers just demonstrated that they're willing to sacrifice their most valuable assets to gain tactical advantage. They've escalated beyond the level where we can afford to hold anything back. Elena turned to her weapons officer. Prepare the quantum plague warheads. Target every factory ship in the enemy formation. The weapons officer went pale. Commander, quantum plague weapons are classified as strategic deterrents only. They're not approved for actual deployment. They are now, Elena said grimly. The Devourers want to play with conversion effects? Let's show them what happens when humans decide to get creative with biological warfare. The quantum plague warheads were humanity's most horrifying creation, weapons that didn't just destroy enemy vessels but infected them with a contagion that spread through quantum entanglement to affect similar technology across vast distances. A single successful deployment could cascade through an entire enemy fleet, turning their own conversion technology against them. Quantum plague warheads armed and targeted, the weapons officer reported. Ready to fire on your command. Elena looked around her bridge, seeing the faces of people who had trained their entire lives for this moment. They had always known the war would require them to do terrible things, but the theoretical had just become real. Fire, she ordered. The quantum plague warheads looked like ordinary missiles as they streaked toward the enemy formation. But, when they struck their targets, reality itself seemed to recoil. The factory ships didn't explode, they simply began to change, their conversion technology turning inward as the plague rewrote their fundamental programming. Within minutes, the massive vessels were tearing themselves apart from the inside as their own systems became hostile. Worse, the plague was spreading through the quantum entanglement networks the Devourers used for coordination, jumping from ship to ship across the entire enemy fleet. Ma'am, the sensor officer reported in amazement, enemy fleet cohesion is collapsing. Their command and control networks are failing as the plague spreads through their quantum links. Elena watched the Devourer formation dissolve into chaos as ships began attacking their own allies, their infected systems unable to distinguish between friend and enemy. It was exactly what the weapons designers had hoped for, and exactly why the weapons had never been deployed before. Commander, her communications officer called out, we're receiving priority signals from multiple council monitoring stations. They're demanding an explanation for the quantum disturbances they're detecting. Elena closed her eyes for a moment. The quantum plague weapons were leaving energy signatures that would be visible to anyone with advanced sensors. The council was about to discover exactly what kinds of weapons humanity considered necessary for this war. Patch me through to Admiral Chen, she ordered. Commander, this is Chen. Excellent work on the plague deployment. Enemy forces in 12 systems are reporting similar cascade failures. Admiral, the council is asking about the quantum signatures. How do you want me to respond? Chen's voice carried a note of grim satisfaction. Tell them the truth, Commander. Tell them that humanity just deployed weapons that can infect enemy technology with contagions that spread faster than light. Tell them we've been developing these weapons for 300 years specifically for this war. Ma'am, that's going to cause massive political. Commander, Chen interrupted, the Devourers just demonstrated that conventional tactics won't work against their evolved technology. We're now fighting exactly the kind of war I warned the Council about 6 months ago. If they don't like our methods, they're welcome to suggest alternatives that don't involve the extinction of galactic civilization. Elena understood. Humanity had just crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, using weapons that violated every principle of civilized warfare. But they had done it to prevent something far worse, the complete consumption of everything they had sworn to protect. All vessels, she broadcast to the human fleet, this is Commander Vasquez. Enemy fleet integrity is compromised. Begins systematic elimination of remaining hostile forces. Remember, every ship we destroy here is one less threat to the worlds behind us. As the human fleet began the grim work of finishing off the infected Devourer vessels, Elena found herself thinking about the children playing in council parks that Admiral Chen had mentioned months ago. Those children would never know about the quantum plague weapons or the terrible choices being made in their name. And, if humanity had anything to say about it, they would never need to know. The real war had finally begun, and it was already clear that by the time it ended, humanity would be something different than what they had been before. The question was whether there would be enough of their original nature left to remember why the fight had been worth it. 2 years after the first quantum plague deployment, the galaxy had been transformed into something unrecognizable. What had once been a realm of diplomatic negotiations and civilized discourse had become a battlefield where the very laws of physics served as weapons. Admiral Sarah Chen stood before the combined emergency session of the Galactic Council, but she no longer looked like the composed military officer who had introduced herself to Admiral Zeftai 26 months ago. Her uniform bore the scars of battles fought with weapons that shouldn't have existed, and her eyes held the weight of decisions that had rewritten the moral framework of galactic civilization. Behind her, holographic displays showed the current state of the war. Of the original 17 invasion points, 12 had been completely sterilized using methods that had required the evacuation of entire star systems. The remaining 5 had become testing grounds for increasingly exotic weapons as both sides escalated beyond anything resembling conventional warfare. Counselors, Chen began, her voice carrying the exhaustion of someone who had been fighting an impossible war for too long. I stand before you today to report that the Devourer invasion has been contained. The immediate threat to core worlds has been eliminated. The chamber should have erupted in celebration. Instead, there was only silence. Everyone present had been monitoring the war's progression, and they understood that contained was a word that carried terrible implications. High Counselor Drexbar, noticeably aged since their last meeting, spoke first. Admiral Chen, our sensor networks have detected quantum signatures consistent with weapons that our best scientists describe as theoretically impossible. Would you care to explain what methods were required to achieve this containment? Chen activated her personal display, showing tactical summaries that made several counselors visibly recoil. The Devourers forced constant escalation by adapting to every conventional weapon system we deployed. In response, we were required to implement increasingly advanced countermeasures. The clinical language couldn't disguise what the images showed. Entire star systems where space itself had been poisoned with self-replicating quantum viruses. Worlds where reality had been restructured at the molecular level to make them uninhabitable to Devourer technology. And, most disturbing of all, regions of space that had been completely cut off from the rest of the universe, sealed behind dimensional barriers to prevent the spread of weapons too dangerous to exist. Admiral, Counselor Vexthera asked, her voice barely steady, our long-range sensors show that the Kepler system no longer appears to exist in any conventional sense. The space it occupied has been replaced by something our instruments cannot properly analyze. Chen's expression grew grim. The Kepler system was the site of the final major Devourer stronghold. They had converted the entire system into a massive processing facility designed to reproduce their technology at geometric rates. Conventional assault was impossible due to the automated defenses and regeneration capabilities. So you destroyed it? We removed it, Chen corrected. The system still exists, but in a pocket dimension that has been sealed off from normal spacetime. The Devourers trapped inside can continue their operations indefinitely, but they can never escape or affect the wider galaxy. The implications were staggering. Humanity had developed the ability to exile entire star systems to pocket dimensions, power that bordered on godlike in its scope. How many others? High Counselor Drexbar asked quietly. 17 systems total have been dimensionally isolated. 3 others were treated with temporal displacement weapons that moved them approximately 10,000 years into the future. By the time they return, any remaining Devourer forces will have exceeded their operational lifespan. Chen continued through the list with professional detachment, describing weapons that challenged the fundamental nature of reality. Stellar collapse accelerators that aged suns to death in minutes. Quantum consciousness viruses that infected artificial intelligences and turned them against their creators. Causality manipulation devices that prevented enemy victories by ensuring they had never occurred in the first place. Admiral, Counselor Jathak interrupted, his warrior's pride clearly struggling with what he was hearing. These weapons you describe, they violate every principle of honorable warfare. They attack not just the enemy, but the very foundations of existence itself. Chen turned to face him directly. Counselor, the enemy we faced was consuming reality itself to fuel their expansion. Conventional concepts of honor and proportionate response became meaningless when we discovered that they were preparing to devour not just our galaxy, but the quantum foundations that allow galaxies to exist. She activated another display showing intelligence gathered from captured devourer technology. The force we defeated was not just an invasion, it was a harvesting operation. Their ultimate goal was to consume enough matter and energy to collapse the local universe cluster into a singularity, which they could then use to fuel expansion into parallel realities. The chamber fell silent as the full scope of the threat became clear. The Devourers hadn't just been trying to conquer the galaxy, they had been planning to unmake existence itself. So the weapons you deployed, High Counselor Drexvar began, were the minimum necessary to prevent the complete elimination of causality as a concept, Chen finished. Every escalation was forced by the discovery that our previous methods were insufficient to address the true scope of the threat. Admiral Zeftai, who had been silent throughout the briefing, finally spoke. Admiral Chen, what is the current status of human military forces? Chen's pause was telling. Human military casualties exceed 90%. Of the 40 million vessels that began this war, fewer than 4 million remain operational. Of the 3 billion soldiers who entered combat, approximately 200 million survived to see victory. The numbers were devastating. Humanity had effectively sacrificed itself to save a galaxy that had spent centuries denying their existence. But, the threat has been eliminated? Counselor Merida asked. The immediate threat has been neutralized, Chen confirmed. However, the Devourers were refugees from a war they had lost in their home reality. We have reason to believe that whatever drove them here may eventually follow the same path. She gestured toward displays showing deep space monitoring stations. Human forces are maintaining dimensional watchposts at the edge of known space. If we detect additional incursions, we will respond appropriately. High Counselor Drexvar stood slowly, his ancient frame showing the weight of decisions that would define galactic civilization for millennia to come. Admiral Chen, on behalf of the Galactic Council, I must ask a question that will determine our future relationship. Ask. Given the weapons capabilities you have demonstrated, and the military infrastructure that remains under human control, what are your intentions regarding galactic governance? It was the question everyone had been afraid to ask. Humanity now possessed the ability to rewrite reality itself, and they had demonstrated willingness to use such power when they deemed it necessary. The traditional balance of power in the galaxy had become meaningless overnight. Chen's answer was immediate and unequivocal. The human species has no interest in galactic governance. Our remaining forces will withdraw to defensive positions in uninhabited systems, where we will continue to monitor for external threats. The galaxy belongs to those who choose to build rather than those who choose to destroy. And if the Council makes decisions that humanity considers unwise? Chen's smile was tired but genuine. High Counselor, we have just spent 2 years fighting a war that required us to violate every moral principle we once held sacred. We did it to preserve your right to make unwise decisions in safety. If we had wanted to rule the galaxy, we could have done so 3,000 years ago. She gestured toward the displays showing the aftermath of the war. The weapons we developed for this conflict will be sealed in dimensional vaults, accessible only if threats of similar magnitude emerge. The knowledge required to create them will be restricted to a small group of volunteers who will carry the burden of that information so that no one else has to. Volunteers? Individuals who will spend the remainder of their lives in isolation, maintaining the weapon systems and monitoring for signs that such power may be needed again. It is not a responsibility we would wish on anyone, but it is necessary to ensure that the galaxy never again faces extinction without adequate defenses. Admiral Zeftai found himself thinking about the children playing in parks that Chun had mentioned so long ago. Those children were still playing, still learning about cooperation and fairness, blissfully unaware that their games continued because a small group of humans had chosen to become something monstrous on their behalf. What about the Council worlds that were affected by the fighting? Counselor Merida asked. Restoration efforts are already underway, Chen replied. Human engineering teams are working to reverse the effects of our more exotic weapons. Most systems should be habitable again within a century. Others may require longer-term terraforming operations. And those that cannot be restored? Chen's expression grew somber. 7 worlds were so thoroughly contaminated by quantum plague that they can never again support conventional life. They will serve as monuments to the cost of this war and warnings about what happens when civilization faces extinction. The council session continued for hours, but the essential framework had been established. Humanity would retreat to the shadows once again, maintaining watch against threats that hopefully would never come. The galaxy would be free to continue its normal evolution, protected by guardians who had paid the ultimate price to remain hidden. As the session finally concluded, Chen approached Admiral Zeftai privately. "Admiral," she said, extending her hand in the same gesture of respect she had offered 2 years ago, "thank you for believing our warnings and helping to prepare the council for what was coming. Your early support saved countless lives." Zeftai accepted the gesture, noting that her hand felt smaller than he remembered. The war had taken something essential from her, as it had from all the humans who had survived it. "Admiral Chen," he said quietly, "will humanity be able to recover from this war?" Her smile was sad but not without hope. "We will become something different than what we were before." But then, again, every generation of humans has had to become something different to face the challenges of their time. Our children will grow up knowing that their parents fought monsters to keep the universe safe. Perhaps that knowledge will help them become better than we were. She paused, looking out through the chamber's windows at the starfield beyond. Besides, someone needs to remember what we've learned about fighting wars that shouldn't be possible. The universe is a dangerous place, and now we know just how dangerous it can become. As Chen and her small escort departed, Zeftai was left with the knowledge that legends had walked among them, fought for them, and then deliberately faded back into mythology to preserve the peace they had died to protect. In the years that followed, the war against the Devourers became exactly what humanity had intended, a story told to children about monsters that came from outside the galaxy, and the heroes who fought them with weapons made of starlight and courage. The truth about quantum plagues and dimensional warfare was classified beyond the highest levels, known only to a few aging council officials who carried the secret like a wound that would never heal. But sometimes, in the quiet hours between the stars, deep space monitors detected energy signatures that suggested someone was still watching. Waiting. Ready to step out of legend once again if the darkness beyond the galaxy's edge ever stirred with new threats. And, in the deepest archives of human space, volunteers whose names were erased from all records continued their eternal vigil, maintaining weapons that could unmake reality itself, hoping they would never again be needed but prepared to use them without hesitation if civilization faced extinction. The galaxy was safe. The monsters had been defeated. And the legends that had saved them all had returned to the shadows where legends belonged, content to be remembered as fairy tales by the children whose laughter they had fought to preserve.